Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie with the patient story. And I've been looking forward to this conversation with this gentleman, Clay Drake. Clay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Clay had spoken with a colleague of mine for a conversation about your multiple myeloma story, right, Clay? This was probably a year and a half or 2 years ago. I can't quite
Yeah.
remember, but I've been seeing you on Instagram. Clay has been updating all of his followers on his, cancer experience. And Clay, I mentioned this just earlier before we started recording, but I was really taken by how your tone, like you're always upbeat and the energy just sort of comes off the screen. And so I thought I have to get back in touch with him. So again, thank you for agreeing to share
Yeah.
more of your
Yeah.
story.
Of course.
So I wanted to start by asking if you could just introduce yourself a little bit, Clay, outside of cancer. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, yeah. So I'm married to my wife, Rachel. We've been married for 29 years ish.
Wow.
And I have two children. Walker is 24. He lives in Denver, close by. And then my daughter, Grace, she just turned 21. She's going to CU in Boulder. So I have a full life outside of cancer. And I enjoy golf. I enjoy outdoor activities and hiking and things like that. But I live day to day, and whatever pops up pops up. So I'm open to pretty much anything these days.
Wonderful. I love to hear that. Wanted to also maybe give people a little bit of a summary of, how it all started. And so if you could summarize, and I know it's hard, it's like years worth of treatment and experiences, but if you could sum up, from the beginning when you started to feel something was off, the diagnosis, up until the DARA that you started taking.
Yeah, yeah. So 2015, late 2015, I wasn't feeling very good. Went to the hospital. Yeah, cancer, and it was kind of a shock. And I wasn't really in a place where I could really comprehend what was going on because I didn't feel good. But then that started the whole onslaught of, chemo treatments and testing. And, I went through, I think, several chemos. The first one didn't work. And then I had some tumors. So that sent me in the hospital for like a month long inpatient chemo. And then I started stem cell transplants. I did those. I did two of those back to back, one auto, one allo. And then it's just since then it's been a series of plasmacytomas, they call them, which are the tumor version in myeloma. I had a few in my back, I had one in my leg, I had one in my groin, and it's just kind of culminated into just a long list of surgeries, testing, treatments, and pretty much what most cancer patients have to go through. But it's always a little different depending on what your issues are.
Absolutely. And so did they categorize you as relapsed refractory multiple myeloma? How did
Yeah,
your
I think so, but really the thing with myeloma is that there's no cure. So I don't know how they ever. I guess the best that we can say is no evidence of disease. And I've been there many times because for some reason my body, the blood work or the bone marrow biopsy doesn't show the cancer, and never really has since the initial stem cell. Actually, since the allo stem cell. So it's hard for me to categorize it that way, but I always feel like it's lurking or lingering somewhere. So
yeah, and we will talk about that and how you've been able to deal with it mentally and emotionally and spiritually at the end of this conversation. But when we left off, we had not talked about the Daratumumab or Darzalex, the trade name for
mhm.
that. Can you describe what happened that led up to your medical team saying, "Let's do this"?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always like to be a little bit proactive. I'm not. I guess I think every cancer patient probably goes through this period of time where they're just kind of waiting for the next thing to happen. And I just got tired of that. I didn't want that. So I said to my doctors, I said, I want to be proactive with this treatment. What can we do that will be proactive? And they said, well, there's a new drug, a fairly new drug, and it just came out of trials, and we think it's a pretty good drug, and we'd like you to try it. And it's an immunotherapy, so it doesn't have a lot of side effects, and there's no chemo involved. So I'm like, yes, let's do it. And when can we start? So that's kind of how that worked, and where I led into Dara. So
Gotcha. And can you describe how you take it and how often? And have there
Yeah.
been any side effects as you've, been on this for years now?
Yeah, so yeah, I've been on it for quite a long time, and actually, it's getting used more frequently with myeloma patients, especially the newer patients. So that's interesting. But I get a monthly. It used to be a monthly infusion. You took about 3 or 4 hours, and now they actually have an injection. It's a subcutaneous injection. So I go in once a month, and they give me a 10-minute injection. Um, with it, they've coupled Revlimid, which is a chemo. It's a really low dose of Revlimid, so that's 28 days out of the month that I take that at a fairly low dose. Um, so it's probably more side effects from the Revlimid, to be honest with you, and I don't really have many side effects at all from the Dara.
Okay, so a couple of questions there with the DARA. So it's once a month, you said, and when you say a 10-minute
Mhm.
injection, I'm not familiar with that. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's that they it's a really thick liquid, and there's like a fat emulsifier in it too. So that's why basically someone's got a needle full of the drug, and they put it into your belly. That's kind of the go-to spot. So they put it into your belly. They switch sides every month because it does kind of bruise you up. It's pretty thick, but it kind of emulsifies the fat and makes room for the drug. And that's just as recent as maybe in the last 6 months, they've come up with this subcutaneous injection. Like I said before, it was always an IV infusion.
And so the 10-minute injection means they're slowly pushing for 10 minutes?
Slowly pushing manually for 10 minutes. That's
Ooh.
right.
I had to give myself like
Hmm.
blood thinner shots and other shots before my belly.
Right.
That was just like as quick as it could be. I cannot imagine a 10-minute experience. For those of us who haven't, and for those who are watching and reading who are having to go through this maybe in the future, how would you sort of describe this and um, how you've mentally been able to sort of get through it, especially compared to
Yeah.
infusions, which is what we're used
The
to.
yeah, the shot, it was a little bit different, but I think so many of us get used to a pain threshold that we didn't realize we had. It stings a little bit, and honestly, it only stings when they move. So the more still they are, the easier it is. And truthfully, I just talked to the nurse the whole time, and by the time I get done talking, and she's done with the injection. So it's really not as bad as it might sound. And yes, I've gone through those same shots. I still do daily insulin, and I don't really care for any of it. But at the same time, I just block it out, focus on the nurse, talk to her, and it seems to go by pretty quickly.
I love that you brought that up about the pain threshold that, people are unaware that maybe they're able to bear and withstand, but you have to do what you have to do,
That's
essentially,
right.
right? Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And so with the Revlimid, is that also once every month? I didn't quite catch that part.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a daily
Really.
pill. So it's an oral medicine. I think I'm on 2.5 milligrams per day. So it doesn't cause. I mean, Revlimid is chemo, so it's a little tougher, but it'll cause gastro things. It'll cause fatigue. In my case, a little bit, but I seem to be getting used to it and tolerating it pretty well. So it hasn't really been a problem in the last probably year or so.
Well, that's great news. So it got better then. It almost feels like your
Got
body
better.
started. So in the beginning, though, when you talk about GI issues, can you be more specific? What were you going through, and how did
Yeah,
you
I
get
mean,
through them?
you might have diarrhea, you might have just nausea. That for me, nausea has kind of been a central theme for my since the beginning of my treatment, and usually it's kicked off by Revlimid because I was on Revlimid early on, and at a much higher dose. I think I had nausea for a solid year, which is awful. So I was a bit leery about this because when I started back on the Revlimid, it was like, I don't want to be nauseous again because that's just not it's not fun. And if you've been there, because it's just you can't function that way, right? But I must have at some point gotten used to it. I don't really take anything for the nausea unless it's bad enough where I might take something like a Zofran or a Compazine. But that's pretty rare nowadays. So I feel pretty happy about, where I'm at with the drugs.
I'm so glad. You have to take every win, right? And so that's
Yeah, for sure. For
um,
sure.
and so you are still on both the Dara and the Revlimid? It's still
That's right.
ongoing. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And
the foreseeable future, I think.
for the foreseeable future. Okay. And I know
Yeah.
we're going to add one more to the list in a little bit. We'll get to that. But
Yeah. Okay.
so you're on this, you're feeling good. You're going through regular scans, right?
Yeah. I do a PET scan like every 6 months, and then they do what's called a muscular skeleton, or a skeletal MRI, which is a full body MRI. I do that once a year.
Okay, right. So it's constant just to make sure that everything's moving as it
Yeah, there's
should.
no new, yeah, yeah, that's right.
So then fast forward to May of last year, May of 2020, and you wrote that you felt, right? You felt the first symptom to sort of pop up again. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that and sort of what happened after?
Yeah, I had a feeling in my groin. It was in my left testicle, and I had this feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't right. And with COVID, I mean, there wasn't really much I could do because they weren't really doing, ultrasounds. I had already had to put off a procedure on my hip because they weren't doing elective surgeries. And so I kind of had this sense that something was happening. I might be getting another plasmacytoma or another tumor or something, but it was in an odd place. So it wasn't maybe until, oh gosh. I got COVID in July, so it was probably in early August when I finally actually got to get in and get an ultrasound to see what was going on.
When you wrote the update and I saw that you you got hit by COVID while you're trying to figure this out, right? And
It's something.
my gosh. I mean, well, since we're talking about it, since you brought it, I mean, I know hopefully we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel here with the pandemic, but you
Right.
know, how did you I guess get through that part? I mean, how bad was that?
Well, so I mean, I think if you asked my doctor, he would have said I would be the one that he would least like to get COVID, right? And I think that's probably true for all immunosuppressed people, cancer patients, and a lot of others. But and I was truthfully nervous about it. But then when I got COVID, I was sick for maybe 2 or 3 days. I called the doctor. They said, "Well, it doesn't sound like you have COVID, but we'll go ahead and get you tested." And of course, it took days to get the test back because that they hadn't kind of perfected that. And once I got the test back, they were like, "Yeah, you have COVID, and as a precaution, we'd like to put you in the hospital for 5 days." Even though at this point I wasn't feeling that bad, right? So they put me in the hospital. They gave me remdesivir, which was only available through IV. Basically, I was there for 5 days, and I got remdesivir for 2 hours a day, and then otherwise I wasn't even hooked up to the IV. So by the time I got out of the hospital, I felt like $1 million, $1 million. No fatigue,
And
no, my sense of smell and taste had kind of started coming back, and really no flu symptoms of any kind. Really felt good once I got through that. Now, so I was glad that we were erring on the side of caution, and
right.
doing it the way we did it, even though it was a boring 5 days in the hospital.
Actually, that reminds me to ask, I mean, have you been getting did you have to get that all through an IV? Have you kept a port or a PIC line or
Yeah, all IV for me. I took the port out not too long after the stem cell, the
right.
second stem cell. So I guess that was at that point we hadn't moved to any other medicines. So, so there are times when I wish I still had the port, but at the same time, I don't miss having some foreign thing in my chest, right?
Right, right. As much as we love being called Iron Man and all that great stuff, it's like,
Right,
let's
right.
just get this out of here.
Sounds better than it really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it was a kind of a double whammy. You actually got COVID, and also because of COVID, it delayed this whole procedure to the ultrasound. And you did write
Yeah.
that it was August that you finally got it, and the next day you found out that it was cancer was probable. Um,
Yeah.
and so from that point, so was your doctor, your oncologist saying, okay, well, first of all, did you have to get another specialist involved because it was a different
It
area?
was it was a urologist
Yep.
at this point, and that's who had to ultimately make the decision of what to do with this. The location makes it difficult for a biopsy. Sometimes the biopsy will cause more problems by spreading in that location. So the decision was to take out the testicle and thus remove the tumor. So that's kind of how we proceeded.
Can you describe, I know it's an orchiectomy, it was the removal of your left testicle. Can
Right.
you just briefly sort of describe the procedure? I know you were under, but like waking up from it and the recovery.
Yeah. Pretty normal kind of under anesthetic. You wake up. It isn't for not days, but hours that you start to feel some discomfort. But for the most part, I mean, I think I got through that pretty good. And like I've said, I mean, your pain threshold raises, and I've been through lots of different kinds of surgeries, biopsies, and I mean, I don't think it was anything that it was unexpected. Uh, didn't feel any different, but I was glad that they actually had taken it out so that they get it tested to make sure that we knew what kind of cancer it was. Because at that point, they were pretty sure it was cancer, but they weren't sure what kind.
And a really important point here that you made when you wrote in was about how important this would be, because if it was a different cancer, you'd have to go to a completely different course of treatment, which
Totally.
obviously you don't want. And so they got the biopsy, sent it to pathology. How quickly did you learn what kind of cancer it was, and talk us through
Oh,
that time frame?
yeah. So that, I mean, I kind of always set my mind that it was cancer because we had that conversation before the surgery. But, I was just hopeful that it wasn't like testicular cancer, because then that would start a whole, like a different chemo regimen. And I wasn't sure how I would do it. And that gave me anxiety. Right. Whereas, interestingly enough, when I found out that it took probably several days, but when I found out, I was relieved, because it's like, well, I know what to deal. I know what I'm dealing with myeloma. Whereas if I had some other cancer, I'm not sure what that means, or I have to go and relearn a whole new bunch of information, and I wasn't excited to do that, to be honest. So when I did find out it was myeloma, I was a bit relieved, and then and then the question is, well, why did I get this, and what are we going to do about it?
And talk us through that. At that point, you're oncologist, and you're relieved. You're like, okay, I know what I'm dealing with, and you can deal with the same medical team too on these decisions. What were the different treatment options presented to you? And then can you take us through sort of the decision-making process between you and your
Mm,
doctor?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was an interesting one, because that location is they call it a sanctuary site. It's in your brain, and in your reproductive organs are sanctuary sites, where, meaning that typically if your body gets a virus or something like that, those are sites that are protected. They're cut off from everything else, so that you can stay intact reproductively and mentally. Those are kind of the thoughts. So I got that. So the question was, well, why did that happen? Why did it happen there? And so, there are some differences of opinion between the two doctors that I have, as far as, was it there and it was kind of a latent thing that just took a while to get going, or was it something new? And I guess I got to the point where I really wasn't sure we'd ever know the answer. And then it became a question of, not really with my doctor, with my wife Rachel, like, what do we want to do about this, and what are our options? And the options were three new drugs, one of which you might go blind, one of which had terrible GI repercussions, and one of them was pretty benign, kind of like the Daratumumab that I was already on. So it was actually a pretty easy decision at the end of the day. But I decided, because I actually had to go through radiation and to make sure that the other side wasn't affected, and that was much tougher than anything I'd done up to this point. Really, it was terrible. So I didn't want to make any decisions about what I was going to be doing until I kind of rested and healed from that. So it wasn't it wasn't a difficult decision. I'll say that.
I would love to talk. Let's talk about the radiation in a second. I know it was really difficult, 25 sessions, and you had to take a break. But I am curious about these three new drugs. And what is interesting, of course, is we're in a time where, and multiple myeloma just has had a lot of different therapies. There's so many clinical trials going on, and that's all very promising. It's every time I hear about something, it's usually about multiple myeloma, in terms of
Hmm.
new treatments. So the three drugs, do you remember what they were called? And it would be great to just sort of talk through a little bit more, in that conversation, like a dive into the conversation with you and your wife about, weighing these different treatments. I mean, did they have different efficacies? But then it's like quality of life matters. These are really important.
Yeah, I think they had similar efficacies, and I don't remember. I think one was selinexor, but I don't remember the other one. I, I I think the decision really came down to, you know, what the quality of life was, because as a cancer patient, you can do a lot. You can go and you can get treatments and you can do all these things, but then at some point, you might get worn out by all the things that you have to do, right? You don't know that you'll get worn out necessarily, but now that I've been through so many different things, I kind of have a sense. Well, with my wife's help, actually, she's the one that kind of brings me back to reality. Like, I'm just, yes, we're doing it, whatever. And she's like, well, wait a minute, let's slow down and let's just talk about this and let's think about it, let's pray on it, let's do whatever we need to do, but let's not jump into something. It is an interesting conversation. And then for me, it was easy once they started saying, here's the side effects of these drugs. Then I was like, well, I don't want that, and I don't want that, and I can live with that. So, it really became a side effect issue, is really what it turned out to be.
I appreciate you sharing that. I know there are so many different kinds of side effects. What are the ones that are I'm not doing that? What are the ones that one's okay? Can you sort of help break
Yeah.
it down?
For me, and this one was like the you know I know one of them was like a really increased chance of blindness, and it could get reversed as long as you stop the medicine. But I was like, well, I'm not going to risk that. That doesn't seem like a good idea. And then for me, the other things that kind of pop out are GI issues, nausea, those things that makes me anxious because I've dealt with that in the past. And then the other one that I haven't been, I have some neuropathy, and the neuropathy is just in one side. So it's a question of whether it's really neuropathy or if it's just a nerve issue on one side. So anything that has to do with that makes me nervous because I'm dealing with that now. I don't want it to get worse. Although the drug that I ended up taking, I think that's definitely one of the side effects is neuropathy. So ironically, I'm probably still going to have to deal with that, even though I didn't really want to.
Right. No matter what, because it's hard to tell the impacts person to person sometimes with these things,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Last thing just about the side effects, which I think is really important for other people who aren't patients to understand, is why things like nausea and neuropathy are so important. And I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, these are things that you're like constantly living through. It's not just hitting you once or twice. It's like constant. I remember with nausea, if you didn't get out ahead of it, it was just impossible to not feel it. Any insight you can give to whether they're people who are on the medical side or pharma to give them that insight, on why it's so important.
Yeah, I just think it becomes a quality of life issue. The nausea is just like pain. I mean, most people think of pain as a side effect, or of something, right? So we all kind of understand pain, but nausea is the same, except it's kind of worse because it's not, you can't function, and now you don't feel good, and something's going to happen. Either you're going to be in the bathroom, or you're going to be throwing up, or you're going to be doing something. And so that one's a tough one. The neuropathy, you get in bed at night and you can't even have a sheet on your foot because it's painful. Another one I didn't mention, and this is a real one, and it's hard to explain, is fatigue. Fatigue is like you wake up from 8 hours of sleep and you're still tired, or you go to the grocery store and you come home and you got to take a nap because you're exhausted. So it's unstoppable. So you really don't have. So you have to weigh those things. I mean, as far as your quality of life, and I'm perfectly willing to accept some of those things, and have for a long time. My neuropathy started very early on, as well as my nausea. So I've been dealing with these things for a long time, and I'm not anxious to add much more.
You've you've dealt with it for so long already. I think that's why it's such an interesting, and it's very personal, obviously, weighing the
Yeah.
whole efficacy, treatment options and quality of life issue. I am curious, if one treatment, so you were presented with three, let's say one, stopped working, would you be open to the other two knowing about the side effects? Or is it one of those, I don't know sort of situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good question. And I have an answer because there's a there's a fourth option that's looming. It hasn't the CAR T therapy for myeloma. It hasn't been labeled for myeloma, and there's two different ones. One just recently got labeled for myeloma, so that's fine. But there's another one, another option that's it hasn't been, but it should be this fall. So in my mind, I was thinking, all right, if this doesn't work, and we can get to this because actually there was a point when I first started taking the new drug where I was like, this isn't working for me. I don't like this. I have a headache. I have this. I don't like all these things. And I was like, well, I'm ready to quit. And then I started feeling better. And I think I kind of slowed that process down. But my thought in the back of my mind was, okay, I can wait until the fall. I can kick the can. This is what I tell everybody. A job as a cancer patient is to kick the can, especially for the ones of us that are, have a cancer that's not curable, or not easily curable. Ours is not curable. Mine is not curable, but it also is treatable. So fortunately, like you said, we have all these great drugs, and it's amazing to me because myeloma is a fairly rare blood bone marrow cancer. It's not a prevalent one, more likely to have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or leukemia or things like that. Those are more, I guess, more talked about. But yeah, we're very fortunate that I had that. And I had that in the back of my mind that, okay, if this doesn't work, then I do have some options, hopefully in the near future.
It's wonderful. It's great to hear
Yeah.
about all the promising clinical trials that are going on. So we'll obviously, keep up to date with you, Clay, and your story. But before we get to the newest drug, I know that radiation was kind of a big deal for
Mm,
you. It was 25 sessions. You had to take a break after 20. What was, this was done on the right testicle. It was preventative.
right. Yeah, it was a preventative thing. Just to make sure that there wasn't a spread to the other side. I don't think anybody thought that was what happened. But the idea was, well, if it was in one side, it could be in the other. So let's just go ahead and zap that. And in the past, I've been pretty receptive, and radiation's worked really well on other areas, other plasmacytomas. So I felt pretty confident going in that was the right thing to do. Unfortunately, after about 20, it's like the only way I can say it is it's like the worst sunburn in an area that you would least like a sunburn. Um, so it was painful, uncomfortable. The fatigue from the 20 sessions in a row. I mean, it's daily, right? It's not the weekends, but it's every day. And it was, it doesn't take a long time. It's probably, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. You're actually having to get into I guess a model where everything kind of holds you together, but you're out for the display of everybody, so it's kind of intrusive that way. At some point, you've lost it. You've lost all your sense of caring about that. But at the same time, it just kind of wears on you mentally, like having to do this day after day, and then along with the pain, and they don't really have many things that they can give you to calm this down. So after 20, I was like, I gotta have a break. So I took 2 weeks off. And as with any radiation, it builds. It continues to build even after you stop it. So it didn't get better right away. It took a good week before it finally slowed down, and then I started again after 2 weeks. But I was kind of worried that it was going to get bad again, and it didn't. So I was fortunate that it didn't. And then I said, you know what, I'm done for a while. I don't even want to talk to doctors. I don't want to do anything with any of you until I can rest for just a second. So it was tough.
I mean, you have, been through so many iterations of different treatments, and I'm glad. I mean, it's almost a sort of form of self-advocacy here, where you were like, I need to listen to my body, and there's that threshold, and I've pushed myself past that so many
Yeah.
times, right? Is that
That's right.
a message for other patients to just, sometimes you're the only one who lives in your body, right?
That's right. And I am one that just, once I make a decision, I go forward and I just do it. I'm a trooper. I will just get through it. This is the first time that I've had to say, stop, you got to stop. Very first time. And I've been through a bunch of stuff that's been horrible. But this was the very first time when I was like, it was hard for me to say stop, but I had to. And so I would tell people, if it's not feeling good, it's okay to have that conversation. And I will be the first one to admit, when I started talking to my radiation oncologist about that and told her how I was feeling, she's like, we've got to stop. You can't go on. So she gave me the confidence to say no too. So between the two of us, we kind of figured out, along with my wife Rachel, who clearly just has to watch me watch me suffer, which isn't easy for the caregiver. So
They have an impossible role so many
hmm,
times, right?
yeah,
And so I'm glad you took that break for yourself, for Rachel. I'm glad your oncologist
yeah,
was on board and supportive, because, as we know, that's not always the case.
yeah.
So how there were a few months then that passed before you started the new drug. Did you still have to undergo scans? How did your oncologist bring you back to the treatment conversation?
It was, I still had to keep doing the monthly Dara, but it's like I said, a 10-minute shot. So that was easily navigated. It was probably, I want to say that towards the end of January, maybe 1st of February, when we finally reconvened. And I started the conversation. I said, I do want to be proactive. I don't know if the Dara is working still. So what can we do? And it was at that point they said, well, we've talked about these three options. I said, well, I think I want the least side effect option. And we talked about that. And it was kind of a process, because no, they don't have anybody. They didn't, and at least in our system, they didn't have anybody that was doing both Dara and the new drug, which is called Elotuzimab or Empliciti. They didn't have anybody doing those two things. So first of all, they had to get the insurance involved to even see if they would cover both, because they didn't know, right? And we talk about all this stuff and we never talk about insurance. I don't know how I've been so fortunate, but I've been fortunate with all my insurance. I mean, it's not that way for everybody, I know, but for me, it just somehow worked. So once they approached the insurance company and they said, "Yep, we're good with both," it was like, when do we start? I think that's kind of where I was. So it was probably mid-February when we decided to get going with the new treatment.
So glad you brought up the insurance issue and the issue of financial toxicity, because that's another conversation for another day, but it adds so
No
much
question.
burden on the plate of the patients and the families, the caregivers. So I'm happy again, Clay, to hear that you didn't have to go through
Yeah.
that. And
I didn't, but I do recognize that is not always the case.
right, absolutely. And so you were able to have a pretty seamless transition. You didn't have any, barriers from the insurance side of things. And so you started the Elotuzumab or Implicity. Yeah, discuss, or if you could describe what that is, how you take it, how often, and have you felt the side effects? You mentioned a little bit about that.
Yeah, I do. I have. Okay, so the Implicity is a similar immunotherapy to the Dara. It targets a different protein. So the idea was, at least in my simple brain, we're targeting one protein allele with the Dara, and this one will target another one. So they're not sure what causes myeloma, but if we can get to two different ones, seems like the right thing to do, especially if the side effects are minimal. So it starts out weekly infusions, and like many of these infusions, they worry about like allergic reactions, so they go very slowly in the beginning, and they eventually speed up to the point now where, after I just finished my two months, my 8 straight weeks of the Elo. It's down to like an hour. The first one was like 4 hours. The side effects that I've noticed is a little increase in neuropathy. I was having some fatigue, which was really bugging me. but it was also, I'd also been in the middle of my COVID vaccination. So I wasn't really sure, and this is not unusual for people who are taking a lot of different things and doing a lot of different therapies, is to know what's causing what. So I got through the second shot of the COVID, and the fatigue kicked up again, and I was like, is it the drug? Is it? I didn't know what it was. Well, anyway, I started feeling better probably about, maybe a few days ago, really, at this point. So I'm going to stick with it for a while, and see if it really is the new immunotherapy. But that it was enough where I couldn't function with that level of fatigue, and I was ready to stop taking it. But at this point, I'm going to keep going.
So what I'm hearing from you is the threshold, the bar sort of is, I will stay on this as long as my quality of life isn't too impacted, meaning I can still function. I'm not constantly having to take naps. The neuropathy is not trending in the wrong direction. Is that right?
Right. That's right. And I mean, I also know that I can still continue to take the Dara with very, very limited side effects. So, in an effort to kind of, like I said, get down the road a little bit so that I could hopefully get to a CAR T or something of that nature that might be a little bit more tolerable, and maybe have a better chances of success.
And, we're hopeful for the CAR T, of course, that hasn't been approved yet. So that timeline's not certain. The other
Right.
drugs that have already been approved, I know they weren't attractive because of the side effects you were told. Would there be something that would make them more appealing? I mean, are they still options in your mind, or have you already said, I'm not going there?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're options, but I mean, to me, the worst would have to happen. There would have to be a series of events that would cause me to really rethink that. And at this point, I don't, you know, I don't know how that would really look, but I just know it would have to be bad enough where I would reconsider those things. So, and truthfully, I doubt I would even reconsider them then, because I'm just kind of waiting for the CAR T to kind of to get going. Hopefully, it's sooner rather than later. But you know, saying that, I mean, at some point, I may have to do what I have to do. So monitor, and risk some things, but monitor it more closely. Might be what I would have to do with some of these drugs that didn't really meet my criteria for quality of life.
Right, absolutely. Again, it's that balance and it's such a personal decision. How much,
It
Clay,
is.
of this decision was impacted by your doctors, how they describe the drugs versus just your own personal sort of take on what life would be like?
I mean, they can't tell you they don't know what nausea feels like to that level. They don't know what neuropathy. So you kind of have to take what they say and ingrain it into what you've already learned through this process. I'm so fortunate. I have two great doctors. One is a scientist, and one is has the most amazing bedside manner. So between the two of them, I really feel like I get a good both sides of the conversation come in, to where yes, I need to. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes I'm going to have to make hard decisions and do things that may maybe affect me. I mean, the whole start of this whole cancer journey, I can't tell you I really wanted to start on Revlimid or Velcade or any of them, right? And I probably really wouldn't, knowing what happens when you do. So, but you have to take what they say. And I was very adamant early on with my wife. I said, let's just not go down the rabbit hole. Let's find the right doctors. Let's trust what they say, and we'll learn through the process, but let's not try to be the doctor. And I'm so glad we did that, because you can go down the Google rabbit hole, and then you're hearing all kinds of terrible things that you probably wish you hadn't read. So I've been really lucky. I do have a good team of doctors, two oncologists specifically, that are really amazing in their own ways.
Well, since it's a positive review for both of them, maybe you could talk about who they are and where you go. I know you had mentioned a couple different healthcare providers in your.
Yeah, so my normal oncologist is here close by. His name is Dr. Steven Schuster. He's with UC Health. That's a provider here in Colorado. And then the other doctor was my stem cell doctor, and he's at Colorado Blood Cancer Institute, which is affiliated with Presbyterian St. Luke's down in Denver. But he comes up to, I live near Fort Collins. He comes up here once a month, so I don't even need to drive to Denver to go see him. It's really a great setup.
Wonderful. And I also had read that you'd gone to even Mayo at one point too. Mayo
I've
Clinic.
gone to Mayo a couple times actually. I've gone to Mayo for a couple of second opinions. One was on a tumor in my S1. They wanted to do surgery to get a biopsy, and I was like, that's a really delicate spot. I think we should get a second opinion. So we went to Mayo for that. And then early on, when I got diagnosed, Dr. Schuster, Stephen, he came from Mayo in Phoenix. So he sent me down there to one of the preeminent myeloma guys, Fonseca, Dr. Fonseca down there. And so I got to see him, and he just, corroborated everything that we'd already been told, which, at that point early on, you need some confidence going forward. You just don't have enough knowledge to really understand what you're getting yourself into.
And this is another point that I am so glad you brought up, Clay, because second opinions are really important if you can afford the time. And we interviewed Dr. Fonseca. He is, of course, he's one of the top myeloma guys out there. So glad you were able to get confidence. Really, it's about confidence in these decisions that you're making, right?
Yeah, for sure. And this, like I've said, this journey has been an interesting one, because for some reason I just got in the right place at the right time, and I've been able to, all the negative things aside, I've been able to navigate through it pretty well, and I've managed to find the right people at the right times for the right reasons. So I feel pretty fortunate that way.
I love hearing that. Just a couple more questions from me, Clay. One is, we've talked about clinical trials, we've talked about upcoming therapies and exciting new treatments. Given the option, would you take part in a clinical trial? Has that ever come up for you and your wife?
Yeah, it's come up a couple times. I would say that if it's a trial just to determine side effects, probably not what I would like to do. If it's a trial that, is necessary because I've run out of options, I think that would be something that I would do. So I guess that's about as simple as I can make it.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I think a big part of the story, Clay, has been, again, the way you have gone through everything. You've gone from the self-advocacy part to powering through and pushing yourself to every possible limit. What's your message to other people who are in, maybe it's similar shoes as you, and maybe not as far along, maybe what to, give them some hope in terms of how to.
Yeah. I think for other myeloma patients, there's definitely a lot of hope. We've talked about, all these drugs. I mean, I think when I started, since I started treatments, there's been 10 new drugs that have come out. And there was actually, they had stem cell transplants, and they had all that. That's becoming less used, it seems like. Although I got to tell you, my donor stem cell was probably what literally saved my life, and I'm so grateful for that. But I would say be your own advocate for sure. That's definitely one. Try to find like-minded people that you can get support from, and not just your caregiver. You can tell that I'm pretty transparent with this journey. Not everybody is that way, but at some point you're going to have to ask for help. And so I'd urge you not to be, don't wait too long to ask for help. Ask for help when you need it. People want to help you. They don't know what to do for you. A lot of times, your friends, your family, they don't know how to engage with you. But don't be afraid to ask for people's help. I think it's important just to keep your mental kind of stability about you. And then, if it takes, I say a lot of the times, like, sometimes you have to get through 1 minute at a time. I remember being in really severe pain with this tumor that I had in my lower back, and I literally would have to get through seconds at a time, and then the pain would subside. And then, and here I am so many years later. So it's possible. And sometimes you think it's overwhelming, but if you can just focus on, a second, if need be, sometimes that can be helpful. So, I'm an open book. So if there's a way that they can contact me through you, I'm happy to take any and all questions. So I really am okay doing that. And I've done that in many ways in many different settings.
Well, it's people like you, Clay, who are so open and, as you described, transparent and really, I think, vulnerable, because there's a part of this where you really have to
Mhm.
just open yourself up to everything. It's people like you who truly, I mean this, make an impact, for
Yeah.
others who are just seeking some connection, some understanding, because it can feel so isolating, being in that position. So thank you,
Yeah. Yeah,
Clay.
you're welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I want everyone to know we'll definitely, put your handles on your story page. And Clay, again, thank you. Really appreciate your time today.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. And again, for everyone, you can find Clay's full story at thepatientstory.com, where we humanize answers to your cancer questions.